Well, good evening, guys. It's so good to not be able to see you. I'm not sure where to stand here with the new intimate setting that we've got going on. But it's great to be here. So good to be able to speak to you guys tonight. We're doing the What Would Jesus Say series. I feel like I'm right up in the face of you guys, unfortunately, but that's all good. And so the last couple of weeks, Pastor Jabin shared about what would Jesus say to George Lucas, the guy who created the massive franchises Star Wars and Indiana Jones. Ben last week talked about what would Jesus say to Israel Folau, the superstar Aussie rugby union player, the ex-Aussie NRL player, ex-AFL player. And if you want to catch up on the series, I'm sure it's online. I know James is online, Ben's is probably online soon. You'll be able to catch up with where the series is going. So tonight we're week number 3 of the series. I wasn't going to tell you it was about Steve Smith, but Benny let everyone know. So it's all about Steve Smith if you didn't pick that up earlier. But just before we start, I wanted to know, has anyone here ever made a mistake or has anyone sinned? Show of hands. Some people haven't sinned. You're awesome. When I was at school, my mates and I, every year or two, managed to find ourselves in a large amount of trouble. Whether it was food fights during lunchtime, whether it was, we had an oval and there was a bushland between the oval and some netball tennis courts. And we thought, it's great to throw some rocks into the bush, but our throws were going onto the netball court. So that didn't end up too well for us. But I remember one time, when you do something wrong and then the pit of your stomach, you're like, oh, I'm dead. I had one of those experiences. My mates and I, we used to make paper hornets. So I don't know if you guys know what these things are. You get a piece of paper, nice and thin, you fold it over and over and over and over again. You get it nice and tight, you bend it, you put it on a rubber band and you flick it at your mate and it leaves welts all over their legs. And we'd become quite proficient at firing these at each other. And, if you didn't get hurt, it was a lot of fun. And so I'm in class one day, we had a not a student teacher, a relief teacher, and they had given us their work for us to do, and they were sitting at the front of the class, head down reading a book. And I remember how it was all set up. We were in 4 lines, and I was sitting in the back row, and my mate was sitting in front of me. And as a smart teenage boy, I thought, what better opportunity to grab one of these paper hornets out and flick him in the back and give him a good, how you doing, during the class. And so I got everything ready, the classroom's dead quiet, got it all folded up, got it ready to flick, lined it up, and I pull it back, and for some reason, my thumb got in the way. And so it's hit my thumb, and the trajectory of the hornet missed my mate and started sailing towards the front of the classroom. Not only did it sail towards the front of the classroom, it was going straight for the teacher. And I don't know if you've ever fired these before, but they go fast. But those milliseconds felt like minutes as I started to ponder what life was going to be like as I hit the teacher right between the eyes. Thankfully, God must have loved me that day very much because the hornet hit the blackboard behind the teacher, sailed over her head, hit the backboard, fell to the ground. She didn't make a move. I got rid of all the evidence and we moved on. But it's that feeling, isn't it, of, I've done something really wrong here. And what I wanted to look at tonight, and we could probably argue whether that was a sinful thing that I did. If I had hit the teacher between the eyes, it's probably obvious. But I didn't. So, we can talk about that later if we need to. But I wanted to look at what sin is and who it can affect. Sometimes sin can affect just us. You do something like cheating on an exam, and generally it just affects you. Sometimes sin can affect a group of people, like your family. Other times, sin can affect hundreds, thousands, millions, like Hitler in the Second World War, where about 60 million people were killed. Sometimes sin has really high natural consequences, like we're talking about the World War, and sometimes the natural consequences are quite small. And sometimes our sin affects people around us, and sometimes someone else's sin affects us. And so tonight I want to have a quick look at the decision-making process behind sin. It's really, really simplistic, but sometimes simple is best as we get to look at these kind of things. I think when we go to make a decision, or we make a decision to do something wrong, and I'll use my paper hornet as an example. Go back. We have a few choices. So I decided I was going to shoot my mate. And I had the opportunity to not do that all that way through between deciding to do that and actually building the hornet and flicking the hornet at him. But I decided it was the best thing to do. And so I repeated my bad choice, didn't I? And I flung it forward. After that, I have a choice whether I want to repair what I've done wrong, which in my case, I just hid all the evidence. If I had hit the teacher, I would have had to go up to the teacher, talk to them through it and deal with all that. Or I have the choice to repair and reconcile. And the reconcile part is when Jesus is in our life and we're able to go to him, confess our sins to him, and have him wipe away our past. So tonight I wanted to look at 4 different stories and kind of use this as a framework for us to see what it's like when we make these decisions. And the first person I want to look at is Judas. Do you guys know Judas from the Bible? No, yep. All right, Ben does. That's awesome. He went to Bible college for 3 years. High fives. Anyway, Judas shared 3 years of life with Jesus. He was there when Jesus raised the dead. He was there when Jesus healed the blind. He was there when the food was brought forward, the loaves and fishes that fed 5,000. He was there when the storms were calmed. He was there when Peter walked on the ocean. And yet, Judas at some stage decided that he wanted to profit from Jesus. He made a decision. In Mark 14:10, it says, "Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted to hear this and promised to give him money, so he waited for an opportunity to hand him over." See, Judas had made a decision. He had made a decision to move into the world of sin by going to the chief priest and waiting for this opportunity to hand Jesus over, essentially. And between that time where he made that decision and when he actually handed Jesus over, he had the chance to change what was going to happen. He had the chance to stop. He had the chance to go to Jesus and say, "Hey, this is what's going to happen," and reconcile with Jesus as well. But he decided not to do that. He kept going, and in Matthew 26:49 it says, 47, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived with him. While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now, but the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him." Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus replied, Do what you had come for, friend." So I want to look at the decision-making process of Judas and just see what he decided to do. He decided to sin when he went to the chief priests. He repeated that decision when he took the chief priests and the armed people to Jesus. Judas's story keeps repeating, unfortunately. He decides not to repair. He decides not to repair and reconcile with Jesus. He decides to take another bad step, and he takes his life. Judas is what mistakes look like, what sin looks like when we don't allow Jesus to come in and reconcile with us. The next person I wanted to look at is Peter. Peter was along that whole journey with Judas in those 3 years in Jesus' ministry, except he was part of the highs and part of the lows. You remember Peter was the guy who said, "You are Jesus the Christ," and a few verses later, Jesus says to him, "Get behind me, Satan." Peter's the guy that walked on water and then sank on water. But Peter's also the guy that Jesus said, Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times, and then the rooster will crow. And Peter said to him, no, Lord, that's not going to happen. And so I want to look at Peter's decision process as opposed to Judas' decision process in this time. See, Peter did sin, didn't he? When Jesus was arrested, he was following close behind. And people said to him, Peter, you're one of the disciples. You're one with them. He said, no, I'm not. And so he decides to sin, and he drops, his reputation line drops down. There he has a chance to repeat his action, repair his action, or reconcile his action. But someone comes to him and says, you're with them again. He said, no, I'm not. And he does it again. And a third time, someone comes to him and says, aren't you one of the disciples? And again, he chooses to sin. And right there and then, the rooster crows. It was then that Peter wept. But it's here that Peter's story is different to Judas's. Judas went away. Peter came back to Jesus. Peter chose that repair and reconcile step. And so tonight we're looking at Steve Smith. I know we do this probably every week, but who knows Steve Smith here? A lot of you. I asked some of the girls at work if they knew Steve Smith during the week. Both of them looked at me blankly. They're in their early 20s. Eventually one said, is he a cricket player? I'm like, yep. What she knew of Steve Smith was just scandal. But the fact of the matter is, Steve Smith in December 2017, so December last year, was ranked second highest ranked batsman behind Donald Bradman. He was pretty much at the top of cricket. And yet at March this year, the Aussies were in South Africa. I'm sure most of you saw this on the news, and they decided that they were getting beaten by too much and that they were going to do ball tampering, which essentially is changing the configuration of the ball to gain an advantage in the game. And so they decided to use a bright piece of yellow sandpaper and rub it on the ball during the game. And the whole process was this. They had the break, so I think it was lunch break or dinner break, whatever it was, and the leadership group decided that they were going to tamper with the ball. So Steve Smith's there. He had the opportunity to stop this silliness at this point, but he didn't. He chose to let it happen. He chose to not stop it when they went on the field, and he chose to let the player, Cameron Bancroft, rub the sandpaper and try and hide it. The outfalling of this is, well, you can see the newspapers. They're the Australian newspapers there. Steve Smith. Shame Steve Smith. It was Steve Smith. And, it was all over the place. He came home, he confessed what he had done, and he was in tears. He asked for forgiveness. He said he was sorry and has since lost the Australian captaincy and is now playing cricket in Canada at the moment because he can't play for any of the major leagues. You see, Steve Smith chose to make a mistake. In that locker room, he chose to do something wrong. Out on the field, he didn't choose to repair that decision at all. He chose to repeat it. And the sandpaper was rubbed on the ball and they got called into question, and instead of repairing it then, he chose to repeat it. It wasn't until later that he chose to confess. He chose to repair what he had done. The horrible fact is, though, that Steve Smith doesn't know Jesus. And so the repair and reconcile part of the story can't come into play. Our series tonight is what would Jesus say to Steve Smith? And as I was trying to work this out, I think Jesus would actually say to him, come, follow me. Because that's what he does with sinners. That's what he does with us. He says, come with all your weakness, with all your baggage, with all your wrongdoings, and follow me, because I can take your longings and fill them. I can take your desires and fill them. See, Jesus came for all of us to say, follow me. I've come to give you life and life to the full. That's what brings us to the fourth person tonight. And that fourth person is us. You see, I think There's a good chance that lots of us are in a position where we're either deciding to make a mistake, or we are making mistakes, or sinning, or doing something wrong, and we have the opportunity to stop that process. You see, it might be you have an exam coming up and you've decided that you can't get a good enough mark, so you need to cheat. And you're wondering if you're going to go ahead. You might have cheated already. You might have something going on at work, and you get to choose. You're in the middle of choosing whether to take the best option or the easy option, which leads through a sinful process. And what I want to put to you tonight is we have the opportunity to stop those processes where they're at. We don't have to repeat this nature that keeps us going down and down. We can repair, we can stop those bad decisions. But even better for each of us tonight, we can repair and we can reconcile. We can come and say, Jesus, this is what's going on. Because Jesus doesn't want us to live in shame and guilt. Unfortunately, Steve Smith's going to be known for ball tampering. The shame and the guilt is going to follow him long past his life. Because whenever someone comes and tampers a ball in the future, they're going to refer to Steve Smith. Whenever they talk about Steve Smith in the future, his career is going to be marred by this. And I want to get really straight. There are natural consequences to sin. You go drink driving and crash your car, you're going to get hurt and you're going to have a bill to repair your car. Forgiveness doesn't change that. That's a natural consequence. But Jesus is wanting us to come to him. He's wanting to wipe clean our slate so that we don't have that guilt and shame moving forward. So what Jesus would say to Steve Smith is, follow me. I've come that you may have life and life to the full. I think that's what Jesus would say to us tonight. If we're in that position of making mistakes, of sinning, he would say, follow me. I've come to give you life and life to the full.